Amy, thank you so much for sitting with me today. I think first of all, I want to say Happy New Year to everyone, because when this comes out, it's going to be 2026. So
Yes, Happy New Year.
we're starting the year strong, and you're going to be starting the year super strong. Like I just told you, everyone keeps asking me where I want to settle in 5 years, and I don't really have an answer. And I keep saying Houston because that's kind of, if my career is going the right direction, Houston's probably a good place to go. And Amy Miller is moving to Houston in
She is.
very soon.
She is.
So give me a bit of an insight into what this means for the future of Amy Miller and what this represents for you on a personal and professional level.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm really excited about going to Houston. I think if you said to me 5 years ago that I'd be relocating to Houston, I would have laughed and been like, sure. Because I'm such a London girl. Like, I love London. But I think this last year, since we launched Pragma, I've been out to Houston maybe a dozen times. And that constant back and forth, I think just is not good for us anyway. But I think then being in country, boots on the ground, I think is just a completely different feel to just being there for like a week or two at a time. Makes such a difference. And I think makes a difference to people's trust and credibility and, thinking that you're really committed to it. And we're really committed not only to Pragma, but to the US as a region. And we're so committed that, I'm moving there. So I'm really excited about that. I think it will be a huge accelerator for the business. And I'm just really looking forward to missing the winter in the UK. So, yeah.
No, I think it's a huge milestone, right?
It is. Yeah, it's a huge milestone. I don't think we when we started Pragma, we had loads of thoughts and ideas and excitements about, what we were going to achieve and what it was going to look like. But it was all theory, right? Like, because you don't know how the market's going to react to things. You don't know if you're really going to be able to do the things that you've promised you're going to be able to do. You might all kill each other within the first 3 months, which we came close at times. But, to think that actually we're in a position now where we are broadening our reach and being based in a different, country, different continent, and hiring people out there as well, which is one of the reasons to go. I feel like hiring people into a business that currently, only has people that we've worked with before is a huge milestone. You want to look at that person in the face and for them to really understand what we do and how we do it and why we do it. And I don't feel like I can do that kind of over Teams or Zoom. So I think it's a huge milestone and really, really exciting.
And it's quick, right? Because Pragma turned 1 in October.
Yes,
I think, right?
September, yeah.
In September. And so I was looking at your stats, and you had like 2 barbecues, 3 launch parties, right? You've got now 32 clients, 4 advocacy committees. 4 committees. I was looking at the barbecues. I was like, where was my invite? So I hope the third one, hopefully I'll be there.
I mean, if you play your cards right, maybe.
But tell us, so Pragma is an institution that's been born out of you were at the Energy Council, then you moved into Pragma, and you kind of took that step into uncertainty to do your own thing. We spoke about that when we had the call and I was in Kuwait, you were here in London. So I want to know from a person to person, what was that, taking that leap like? Of course, you're now taking the leap to Houston, but I think the leap before that, actually starting this, and we spoke about the difference between the US mentality and the UK mentality. How have you managed to, in that moment when you're making that decision, when was the moment you thought, I have to do this?
Yeah, it's such a good question, because it was never a plan. I've never really actually had any plans. I've never thought like, right, this is what I want to achieve in 5 years. This is what I want to achieve in 10 years. I've just kind of done the thing that makes sense at the time and that I've enjoyed and that, has been fun or has been exciting or has been, has given me more expertise or knowledge or education or whatever it might be. And then it has just kind of led to those things. So it was never like, right, in 2024, I'm going to do this. I think loads of things happened that created this mindset or this interest in doing the business. The first was just the passion that I have for the industry. And there comes a point when you're working for someone else that you can't always put your stamp on something. You can't always lead with what excites you the most because you're working, and we were working for Blackstone. So it's a pretty significant organization. That was
on Energy Council.
That's Energy Council's ownership structure. Okay. So I think, there was a bit of that. How do I put my own stamp on something that I'm really passionate about and can really get that credibility from? And honestly, the second thing was COVID. And I hate to like give COVID any credit for anything, but we were in a really difficult position at the Energy Council during COVID. We were trying to run, in-person events globally around oil and gas when, the oil price was like negative.
Yeah.
You couldn't meet in larger groups. It was so difficult to keep that business running. We lost 50% of the business. I became CEO 6 weeks before we all went home and never came back to the office again.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So all of these plans and all of these thoughts that I'd been working towards with the Energy Council couldn't materialize because all of a sudden, we had to make huge swathes of people redundant, and it was awful, honestly. I had zero experience of really doing that. I mean, no one did, right, on that scale.
Have you been CEO before then?
No.
So that's a big leap as well.
No, so that was a big leap. And then suddenly it was like, oh, by the way, 50% of your business is going to have to go. So I think that was dark. But out of that, we had to really rethink, how do we work? How can we still bring people together? How can we still have valuable conversations? We did loads of trial and error with digital and what could work online, what could work in smaller groups, etc. And I think it gave me the confidence to think, oh, I can like play around with things, and sometimes things work and sometimes they don't, and that's okay. But the main thing I think COVID gave me was I've always been like a people pleaser. Are my peers, but more importantly, are the people that I'm reporting into, like, do they think I'm good at my job? Am I being the best I can be? What do they think of me? And COVID was a real changing point for me where I just stopped caring about that as much because we were just in survival mode. So I was like, well, I'm going to do the best for my team, whether that's COVID or whether it was me in a new role. It just completely changed my approach to, okay, I know I'm doing the best I can do. I know, or I think I'm doing the best I can do for the people that I'm working with. I don't care what you think, actually. I'm just doing my best. And that just completely changed. And I think at that point I thought, yeah, I want to do this for myself and not do it for someone else.
Yeah. And it's quite liberating when you get away from that, right? Because I'm trying to please other people. It's like the moment that you can then actually do things that you want to do. And I think something I found interesting, which I kind of relate to your story, is that kind of you've taken the path least traveled, which everyone that I keep speaking to always, the advice they give me is go where other people don't necessarily want to go, do weird things that other people wouldn't do, spend ridiculous amount of money on setting up your podcast if you want to, if you want to, right? Just do it.
Just do it. Yeah.
And so you've spoken about the prison job a couple of times, which is super interesting.
That keeps coming up now. I've mentioned it.
Yeah, now you've mentioned it. Everyone's gonna ask you about it, but I don't want to ask you specifically about the story. But like, what I find very interesting is that in that job you interviewed people, right? So, and the last 3 jobs I've had are interviewing. This is interviewing. For the energy year, I do interviewing. And for my previous job was interviewing. And you really learn how to deal with people, extract information from people, from very different types of people. Yeah. You have to see, you go onto the call or you go into the meeting and like, this guy's like this or this woman's like this. You have to learn to deal with people. So I'm really, and you were interviewing like people like A-list, not A-list, like people, like dangerous people, right? Like people with messed up stories, right?
Yeah.
What kind of, I mentioned I'm interested in mentality and we come from a political background, right? So I did IR and, everything's based in like human nature. So what do you learn about human nature, about people in such a weird kind of like out of the box dynamic, which maybe you're bringing into your work today and everything you've done since then?
Steep questions, Amelia. The prison actually serves me really well all the time, the experience I had there. And I never would have thought that. Like working for a year in a prison, I never thought, this will be really helpful later.
You never know what the ROI is going to be.
You just never know. But it's given me definitely the tools to speak to people that are maybe from a different background to me. I rarely speak to criminals now, but but certainly, different backgrounds, different languages, different cultures. It's given me a resilience, I think. I was called many different names whilst I worked there, and 99% of them were very bad. And I think that doesn't happen now, but we definitely always come up against people who maybe, in a meeting don't understand it, or don't think what you're doing is a good thing, or, don't believe in the product or whatever. And it just is that resilience to kind of be able to take it. And, you have sales calls where people hang up on you, or it happens. And it's just, it builds that resilience in you to do that. So I definitely think that's helped. In terms of human nature, I think something I'd probably say is we're all actually the same. We're born the same, wherever we are. And there's a real lottery around birth. And I think this comes back to energy access as well, which is something that's really important to both of us. I know it's just a lottery. I was born in the UK. Lucky me, I didn't do anything to deserve that, and then to have access to the electricity and gas and natural resources that I have access to, and many others weren't. And actually, I come from a very privileged background, and I don't think I realised that actually until I spoke to people in the UK even that didn't come from that background. And we're always talking about what can we do in the developing world and in developing economies. But there is a level of poverty and lack of education in this country, which I was, never really aware of because it didn't come from that background. So I think that was a huge learning for me, is that actually we all start differently, but then we have access to different things. I think it was at the time, and this is 2006, 70% of people coming into prison, and they were all 21 and above, because it was a high security establishment, were illiterate. So that means in the UK at that time, in this community of 700 men aged 21 and above, 70% of them couldn't read or write. That to me was...
Is that the same today?
I don't know. Okay. And I will say, I don't know what the stats are today. That was, 20 years ago. I would be surprised if it was really different, actually. So, that could be something to look up. But I was so shocked by that. I think it's taught me this kind of, we all start in the same place. I think very rarely are people bad. I think we just have experiences and, things that create, decisions in us that maybe the next person wouldn't make. And a lot of it comes out of a lack of education, a lack of support networks, and poverty. And so, I think that taught me a lot about people.
Yeah, I think that's an important realization, right? And also linked to that, something I liked when I watched one of the other podcasts you did, is that you're quite openly ambitious. In the past, you said you wanted to, when you were thinking about who you wanted to become, you knew who you wanted to become. You wanted to become someone. You wanted to have some kind of level of recognition. You said that, and that's not something. And also, you said quite openly you want to make money, right? That's something I say as well. I'm not here only to make money, but at the end of the day, if I want to sustain your people around you, you've got to do it, right? And it's something that, like I said, in the UK is not very. It's seen it's seen as a kind of dirty word, right? But so where does that come from? Now you're part French, part from the UK. So what's kind of built that in you and that ambition, and what's really been the driver of that, would you say?
Yeah, I don't think it's come from my French side either.
That's what I was...
I don't think it's of English or French, but I agree with you. I think when we have these conversations, I've been so surprised in a good way at conversations in the US where people really support and revere that kind of entrepreneurial spirit of being ambitious and trying something, and if it fails, it fails, and you start again, and kind of, no love lost, you carry on. What's it doesn't matter, which I don't think has been the same here necessarily with people we've spoken to. My family is quite entrepreneurial as a whole. So my grandparents, my English grandparents were bakers, but started their own business, started their own bakery after the war, and so they had that maybe entrepreneurial spirit. My uncle, same. He's a coffee entrepreneur, and has been hugely successful in his career. So I suppose to a point, kind of it was around me. But I think I've always lived a little bit in my own little world. I don't really take a lot of, it is important to me, I was saying this people pleasing, it was important to me that people kind of believed in me and thought I was good and stuff, but generally in terms of what I want to do, I'm a bit like, well, I'm going to do it. There's nothing stopping me.
That's always been since the beginning,
since
really?
the start. Yeah. When I was really little, when I was 4 or 5, I'd said to my parents I wanted to be the first ever female bin woman, because I always saw bin men but never bin women. And I thought, well, if I could be the first something, it doesn't matter what it is. It didn't matter to me that it was a bin man or a milkman or a post, what, it doesn't matter, or a business person. I just want to be the first something. So it's clearly always been ingrained in me, as nature maybe rather than nurture.
And it's the idea of wanting to do something that, this goes back to the idea of doing something that other people don't necessarily want to do, right?
Yeah, and this, with Pragma, we really ran into oil and gas, right? We are unapologetically talking and supporting, oil and gas companies at a time where, because that in the last 18, 24 months, I think that the sentiment maybe has changed slightly, maybe not in the UK, but elsewhere, where people were kind of moving away from it. And, it was all about renewables and no one really wanted to touch oil and gas. And it felt more and more polarized and a bit of a dirty word. And we just kind of ran headfirst into it.
I think there's so many lessons we can take from going into energy now, from companies like yours, even though I've sat down with NJ, the industry from my perspective seems to be scared to say what it really thinks.
Yeah.
But every example we have of people that go out there and scream the truth, unfiltered, are getting success. You guys, a year in, you're moving to Houston, NJ's done what he's done. I think if the industry, I don't understand why. It's one of the reasons I want to do this podcast. I want to kind of encourage the industry to change the way it operates, because at the moment, clearly the way we're operating doesn't work, right? And so I think this idea of going out there and unapologetically being ourselves as individuals and also as an industry would really, and that being transparently open about what the industry is, what we've done badly, what we need to improve, but what also we provide, I think is really important. So I kind of want to go into the inception of Pragma, because you told me the story of you at the Energy Council, and then you and Ben were looking at how to do it, and then you got Jack involved. So tell us about how that really came about, and it went from vision to reality, because that's a big thing that I have in my brain always: vision to reality, vision to reality. How can you take something from an idea and then make it reality? Because for me, every time I do that's the one thing that gives me so much motivation, seeing, even if it's a small thing, taking it from an idea to reality. The feeling of doing that is unreal. So how did you take Pragma from a vision to reality?
It was actually quite quick in a way.
Yeah, has been.
But even the kind of beginning bit, I think I've been thinking about this for a while. I would say, so COVID was what, 2020, 2021, is when I first started thinking, right, I think I would like to do something like this. But I wanted to get to a point where the Energy Council will always have such a special place in my heart. And I wanted to get to a point where we'd recovered, from
you wanted to leave it better than you found it, right?
Yeah, I wanted to leave it in, if not better, in the same place as where we'd started, because it went into, it was such a difficult time through those kind of 2 years. So that was really important to me, which is why maybe it took a little bit longer to kind of make the call. So I wanted to finish that in a good, in a good spot. But then it happened quite quickly, because I just really knew what I wanted to do. With Energy Council, a lot of the focus was on kind of connecting oil and gas companies with finance and investment, and how do we kind of recapitalize the space. But it started to be perhaps more broad. So it was oil and gas, but it was adjacencies, like CCS, it was renewables.
Right, yeah.
Whereas I was very focused on this kind of oil and gas bit.
Yeah.
There's less and less, investment going into oil and gas.
Yes, one is needed, right?
Correct. But there's loads of alternative capital providers that were starting to look at space and interesting. So that I always wanted to, how can we use a slightly different model to create better connections between, there's so many projects that need money, and there's actually so much money, but often they just don't know each other and they don't meet. So how can we create that isn't just through a conference, which is quite kind of one-dimensional?
Yes.
But then in addition to that, it's if you want to attract capital as an oil and gas company, you have to have lots of other things in place. And you have to have the right board, you have to have the right management team, you have to have the right processes, you have to have the right technology, you have to be committed to growth in a certain way that's going to be interesting to investors. You need to position yourself in the right way, you have to have the right messaging. And so this kind of idea developed of how do you be kind of a one-stop shop to be like, you're an oil and gas company, how can you present yourselves as the highest performers and the organization that should be the ones to get, this investment. So that's kind of how it started. And then it just went really quick, I think, because we were like, right, these are the things that we believe in. We were really certain from the start on what our purpose was and what our passion was. And I think if you've got a passion for something and you know what your purpose is that you're trying to do, it just kind of I'm not saying it was easy, because it's not easy at all. I don't want to make anyone think that it's, because it's not. We've worked 23 hours a day for a year, but the idea, and then to see it suddenly, we worked with a designer to kind of create the concept and create the website and create the logo, and just seeing it all come together, it just all clicked. And I said to you earlier when we were just kind of chatting, I've had these moments with Pragma where it freaks me out, because so many things have been really serendipitous and have just kind of fallen into place. And there's been so many things, so many times where we've been like, oh God, we've said we're going to do this, we've actually got no idea how we're going to do it. And then, a call comes in from someone, and it just works itself out. And that's probably partly because we have a confidence in it. We work well together as a team. We can support each other and rely on each other, etc. But I do think there's an element of luck, that comes into it as well. And I think it was good timing.
I was going to say,
for
you're doing the thing
at
the right time.
Right.
It's most needed.
And that's rare, right? You don't always hit upon that. So there is an element of luck for that as well. We took the plunge at that time and it was the right time. But you're right. It's to see something from a blank piece of paper into clients and money in a bank account, and it's crazy.
And how's that process of getting Ben and Jack on board? Because I believe Ben was in it from the beginning, from the kind of, or was it your idea and then Ben came in and then Jack came in? Or how did that work?
So yes, I left and had this idea and thought, right, I want to create this. And then Ben and I had some conversations, but Ben was on a path where he thought he wanted to be an investment banker. And that was, I know that's what he wanted to do. And he was thinking he would follow that path.
Okay.
And then Jack had left the Energy Council to go and join another business, a friend of his, in kind of an educational sales, sales selling scenario. And he, I think, realized actually, oh God, it's not the selling that I'm passionate about, it's the market that I'm selling into. And so then he was like, oh, maybe, I could do some work with you. And that kind of started. And then Ben put pay to his investment banking dreams. Quite quickly. And I think we realized that between the three of us, the contact base that we had and the access and the regional split that, we were all comfortable with was just, it really kind of worked together and was really kind of synergistic. So yeah, it happened over probably kind of a 3 or 4 month period.
Yeah, like you're saying, everything happened quickly. I feel like it's just like, once you, I think the key is what you said, once you have like the vision and the passion for it, and you kind of see a path, and you kind of just, I was execution over too much thinking,
Yeah,
once you execute, it just happens.
Just do it. And we were so lucky, again, we'd, over our time in our, respective previous roles, we'd created fantastic networks and we'd met some brilliant people. And I'd met with, Brian Gilvari, who is the ex-CFO of BP and chairman of INEOS now. I'd met him back in 2021 at an event, and we were sat next to each other, and he kind of said, what's your dream? What do you want to do? I knew who he was.
That happens a lot. You go to an industry, looking at, I think I recognise him.
Yeah. Oh, I think he's quite important.
And a quick research under the...
But he was very much like, he was very impressed by the event that we'd organised and put together. And he was like, what's the plan for you? What do you want to do? What's next? I was like, oh my God, better come up with something good. This is Brian Gilvari. And from that moment, really, kind of inspired me actually to really think about that and what did that really look like. And, you know, he'd said to me, as soon as you think you're in a position where you want to do something on your own. And when he asked me, I just kind of said it. I was like, I think I want to do my own thing. And
I was going to, what was your answer? That was your answer?
Yeah, that was my answer. But it hadn't been something that I'd ever vocalized before, but he kind of brought it out of me, I think. And he was like, great, well, whenever you're ready, like come and see me and let's see if, you know, we can put some credibility, some money, you know, whatever it is that you need behind it. So I did. And I think that's still probably that meeting that I had with Brian where I kind of he said, okay, bring me a business plan and show me what your 5-year plan is. I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing in 5 days from now, but okay. And put it together. And I think coming out of that meeting where he said, you know, I'm happy to, because I'd gone in just to ask him to kind of be part of the board. So could he chair the board and just add his name, you know, to the brand and what at the time, what I was doing. Yeah, it was just me. And he said, yes. He said, also, let me put some money behind it. And what a game changer. And I remember coming out of that meeting and I kind of had no one like to celebrate with, you know, a little bit, because I was like, no one really understands, you know, my friends won't necessarily get it or whatever. And I remember standing on the corner of Pall Mall and just like jumping up and down and being like, God, I think this is actually a thing. Like, I think, you know, if this person thinks that it makes sense, it's not just in my head, you know, it makes sense on paper as well.
Yeah.
And that was really exciting.
That's a cool moment, right?
Yeah.
I think we're all chasing that moment. Like when I'll go next, hopefully when I achieve what I want to, I'll go to Pall Mall corner and start
I'll show you exactly where it was. Yeah.
But yeah, who wouldn't, so apart from him, who would you say are other people that have really influenced like this becoming a reality as well? Or not even just like Pragma, but throughout your whole life, who would you say the people that have really shaped who you are and brought you to this place? Because I think for me, like, you know, the people that, we can go into that later, but there's people that have put me where I am today, you know, for different reasons. And so who are those people for you?
Yeah, I actually, whenever I think about this question, I never think like, oh, there's this person. It's more moments that have happened where 100%. There's been someone's taken you under their wing, or, you know, they've helped you to do something different or to achieve something. There was had a university lecturer. I did politics obviously at uni, and I remember going to, most of my tutorials was me and loads of boys who were all kind of public school educated, very confident, very politically savvy. I thought I was, but I wasn't in comparison, or so I thought. And I remember about halfway through the first term, one of my tutors came up to me and said, "You're really quiet in tutorials, you know, but when you write your essays, they're really good. So why are you not speaking up?" As I'm so intimidated, I'm just too scared. And he was like, all these people are talking complete rubbish.
Bollocks, yeah.
Complete rubbish. So feel free to add to it. And he just removed any of that kind of intimidation that I had. And then this is a few years ago, I was invited to a drinks thing in the UK in London, and I arrived and it was a members club, and the guy at the desk said, "This is men only." Oh, I've never felt so small in my life, and yet someone came down from the event and picked me up and like took me in and like really shouted at, you know, the man on the desk, and brought me up into this terrifying room full of men who were like 60s, 70s, you know, who'd been in the industry a long time. And I felt so out of place, but he really helped me to think, no, you're not, you're bringing something new and exciting and important. And so it's not really like,
I see what you mean,
you know, like individual people. I think it's just moments where people have put themselves out for me, and supported me in doing something new or different that's been like such an enabler. I think that's been really important.
No, I also want to ask you about like entering spaces where you don't particularly tend to, or you don't seem to belong, right? The energy, you just mentioned that being at the university, and then now being in the energy industry, going to the men's club. Of course, you're a woman working in an industry which is heavily dominated by men. From my perspective, I'm in an industry heavily dominated by older people. Yeah. Trying to enter at 23 years old, where I still look like a kid, and people see me, what the hell's this guy doing? You know? So what would be your advice to people, not just women, but maybe young people like myself who want to kind of make an impact in energy or any industry? What's your kind of advice to them about what they can really do to kind of bypass that feeling of that you don't belong and kind of being there and making an impact? How can you bypass that?
Yeah, so what I really believe is that every single person that you're in a room with has the same feeling that you have.
Okay.
So they will feel like they're too old to be in the room, or they're too white to be in the room, or they're too, just anything. And so I think I've learned that over the last kind of 20 years or whatever, speaking to people and interviewing people. We've done so many podcasts back at Energy Council with CEOs of companies who've done take after take after take. Yeah.
Like scripted kind of things,
on podcasts, on presentations, on recordings, where they've been like nervous, and you think, what? Why are you nervous? That's crazy. And so when you start to see behind the curtain of that, you realize actually I think everybody is in the same boat. And often the way that if you're feeling anxious or unsure, it might come out as a bit aggressive or a bit aloof or a bit arrogant. Someone might also just be having a bad day, but generally it comes out in slightly different ways, for different people. And it can be quite intimidating or off-putting if you're on the receiving end of that. But I think I just have to keep reminding myself of those times where I've seen insanely senior people stumble or be anxious or nervous about something. And my advice to anyone would be everyone's feeling the way that you feel. So even if you're the youngest person in the room, someone's worried about being the oldest person and not relevant anymore. So don't worry about it. I hate when people say don't worry, because of course you can't help it, but try and think like that it's not you that's in this on your own in this situation. Everybody's got something that's holding them back somehow.
Now, you mentioned something interesting there as well about seeing behind the curtain. And I think what the energy industry, we touched on it before, what the energy industry can do before is kind of let people see behind the curtain a little bit more.
Let people see and talk about it.
Because what the industry does is important. Again, we're not perfect. I don't think any industry is perfect. You can go online. And when I have a discussion about renewables and oil and gas, I tell people to go online and search China mountains, because then the amount of diversity that's being killed just to, do that, everyone so it's like there's a give and take with everything, right? So
there is.
How can the industry, because I think the issue is that the industry doesn't necessarily want to let people behind the curtain. How can we get the industry to let people behind the curtain? Because once people are behind the curtain, I think they'll see good things.
I think it's just also creating new habits, and it takes time. If you've been in an industry for 20, 30, 40, 50 years and you've always done something a certain way, it's really hard to change that. And so we do need younger people to come in and question it and say, like you're doing, let's have a conversation about it, let's question it. One of the difficulties we have in the industry now is that much fewer young people, in particular in kind of the Western world, want to come into the oil and gas industry. So that's a problem, because actually it's about people coming in with new ideas and new ways of thinking and new ways of kind of attacking things. I think for such a long time, the industry was revered, right? It was like working in oil and gas was a great job to have. It was an important job to have. There was never a need, in particular in the West. I think where you're working on new projects, for example, in the developing world, in Africa or Asia, where you've had to do a lot of community outreach and community work, you might have seen that more firsthand. But if you were working for BP in London, no one ever thought about it. It was never needed. You never needed to explain yourself away. It was a job like any other job that you did that was well thought of and well regarded. And I think when that started to change, I don't know whether the industry had the tools or was quick enough off the mark. And it felt like everything they said then felt like greenwashing. It felt defensive. Whereas
instead of owning it,
instead of just owning it and saying, well, actually, no, but that's not true. We do this. It's like that might be the case, but it comes across as if you're trying to defend what you're doing. And I still think now, and I think there's been a lot of progress on that, because when the chips are down, you really have to stand up and shout about it. And I think the work that people like Dave Whitehouse are doing at OEUK, the Aberdeen Chamber of Commerce, others. Actually, they have got a really powerful voice and they're using it. And I think they're using it a lot better than perhaps they were, 3-5 years ago. But what do I think could be different is I think leading with positive. So much now is just leading with negative. Everything you read in the news, everything you read in social media, it leads with fear or it leads with anxiety, climate death, climate change. And not just climate, with anything, with taxes or with, budgets or whatever it might be. It always leads with the impact that it will have negatively on a society. Whereas if we start to think about some positives and talk about the positives, the UK have cut oil and gas emissions methane emissions by 30% in the last few years. That's huge.
Is that not progress?
Do people know that? No, because we don't lead with positive. We lead with like the defense of a legal case or whatever it might be. I think that's important. And then secondly, I think the channels are important. The people that have the most anxiety about the climate are the kind of 18 to 30 demographic, but how they're consuming their content is online, it's social media, it's TikTok, it's Instagram. Are we using those channels as an industry to get through to people, to talk to them about, do people know that oil and gas is in everything that they touch? Do they know it's in their laptop? Do they know that oil is in their mobile phone? Do they know that that's what their upholstery is made of and their clothes and their hair products and their makeup? No, because why would they? I didn't know that, before I was in this industry. So I think just talking positively about the positive impact that the oil and gas has is really important. And I think the channels that are used to do it need to be rethought as well.
Yeah. No, I think something you spoke about on one of the other podcasts you're on, you spoke about that we're fighting with Just Stop Oil and all these kind of activist groups. We're fighting a very emotional narrative, and then we're trying to counter it with complete logic and facts, right? But I was thinking about this a while ago. I was like, do we not have does the industry not have an emotional narrative to play?
Yeah,
I think we have a hugely emotional narrative to play. Why we have a hugely emotional narrative to play, backed up by facts, whereas the other side is probably emotion, then backed by more emotion, right? Because I always think. As we've been speaking about, I'm quite an ambitious person, right? But then my ability to be ambitious and to have big dreams is because I have access to a basic level of privilege, right?
Yeah.
Which allows me to see beyond today and think about tomorrow and think about the next day. Whereas people in other regions in the world, people maybe in other regions of the UK don't necessarily have that because they're thinking always about what's today.
Yeah.
And what breaks my heart is that people can't dream the way I dream because they don't have access to something so simple as electricity.
Yeah.
And I think explaining it like that to people, I've used that narrative with people and I've seen it work. I think, what do you think about, kind of changing the strategy a little bit, using emotion from our side? But I've had this conversation with someone in Ghana recently and he kind of looked at me as if I was like naive, young and naive. Like, what's this kid talking about,
Yeah.
But I think that's the problem, It's like we need to find a different way around it.
I think emotion is important, but it has to be used in the right way.
Yeah.
I think there is a culture now that goes beyond oil and gas as a conversation, which is that everyone's kind of in it for themselves. People are just focused on, okay, what do I do? How am I successful? What impacts me? I think there's less and less time dedicated to thinking about others. And so I think using an emotional narrative, let's say in the UK or the US, around access to energy for those less fortunate in a different country is too far away. It's too many things removed.
Yeah,
You're just thinking about you, then you might think about your community, and then you might think about your country. So I think going beyond that is too much. But I agree, on the emotional side, do people understand the impact that energy has on incubators in hospitals? or access to cancer treatment, or just access to a hospital, frankly, at its core. Do people understand what would happen? We came hours away from a blackout in January in the UK.
That's crazy.
No one knows about it. But the fact is that really, what would people do without the internet for a day or two or three or beyond?
Bit of carnage.
Right? What would we do without just the luxury that we have of just being able to switch on a kettle, or make our food in a microwave, or any of these things, these tiny things. And this is a bit controversial maybe, but
that's what we want.
That's what we want.
That's what we want.
The best thing that could happen in the UK, I think now, is for us to have a series of blackouts. Because without it, I don't
people
think
aren't going to realise, right?
People get it. People don't understand that you would just have to sit quietly and do nothing. You'd have no transport. You'd have no travel. You'd have no internet. You couldn't work. You couldn't make a phone call. You really couldn't do anything. And I think until something actually relatively drastic happens, because people in the developing world are living that drastic life every day. They can't read when it gets dark. They haven't got a light. They can't cook in a way that is sustainable or that is environmentally friendly. I personally think the narrative should be not necessarily context. I think you need all forms of energy. I don't think it's oil and gas is better than another form. I think depending on where you live, you should be using the resources that make most sense to you. So in the UK, for us, it makes most sense to have gas, and it makes most sense to use offshore wind because it's very windy. So we have access to that. If you live in Spain, maybe solar is a better idea than wind, right? So I think it's regionally important. But if you're in Africa or Asia or Latin America and you're using wood burning to cook, the best thing you can do, the best thing we can do as an industry is not move from oil and gas to renewables. It's move from wood to gas.
Transition, right?
The only transition I think we should be speaking about is coal or wood to gas. Everything else, I think, is addition. I don't think we should be transitioning. I don't think we should ever be using that word to go from oil and gas to renewables. I think we should be saying, how do we get more? We're going to need more energy. There's more people. Population continues to grow. We want data at the drop of a hat. We use AI for every single, we use ChatGPT for every single thing that we do. We need more energy and we need more water, not less.
So you think we need to stop using the word transition?
Yeah, I do.
Like point blank?
Point
that
blank.
Needs to go?
We don't use it anymore.
Really?
We've taken it off our website. We've taken it off like anything that we do because we don't believe in it. We think there should be an all of the above approach. And you need everything. You need more wind, more solar, more hydrogen. Actually, I don't really agree with hydrogen, but more, more geothermal, more CCS, more oil and gas.
No, I haven't heard that before. That someone taking away the idea of transition, because it is the idea of transition is kind of like misleading, right? Because it's like transition away from something to something, right? But we're not transitioning away from anything. We haven't even transitioned away from coal yet.
No,
really, have we?
In fact, coal is growing. People, you talked about China. People talk about China as, look at this amazing renewable
Everything
story.
they produce is literally dirty, right?
They're building more coal-fired power stations than they ever have done. So they
import like 9 million barrels of oil a day or something like that. I think it's about 9 million barrels of oil a day.
But their story is more coal, more renewables. It's not transitioning away from, and now I'm not saying China is like as a poster child for this, because I don't agree with that. There's a lot of supply chain issues and everything else. But in the UK, which is my passion is oil and gas, globally, but the UK is my passion of, I live here and I see it every day. It makes no sense to me ideologically that we're moving away from gas when we have it. It can't be a climate decision. So because if we're still using the product, and so in order to have access to the product, we're importing it, the environmental footprint for that is much greater. And to me, that it's not hard to understand that.
And then from a political side as well, like energy security, if you can have your own own resoures that on another level,
have to rely on anyone else. Why would you not? So there's got to be something else, right? I'm now like conspiracy theorist, because it can't be. It doesn't make sense to me that it would be environmental if you understand that environmentally removing domestic resource
Is the worst.
is the worst decision you can make. So I would love a political, maybe an ex-political person to say, actually, this is the real reason.
Right.
Because that doesn't make
Do you think
any sense.
there's some other reason we don't really know about?
Got to be.
There has to be.
Got to be.
So if I was Ed Miliband, what would you say?
Don't get me started. I would love to get stuck in a lift with
I'd love to have him on this one day and like just have a conversation. Well, no, debate him.
Yeah, and I would love to understand it. I would. And something I will say is there are some activists out there who actually, without them, I actually think they were needed for industry to start thinking differently about things like methane and emissions and longevity and that kind of. So I actually. Some of their tactics and stuff, I don't think have been right. And I think some of the ways that they've approached things haven't been right. But actually the narrative and what they've brought, in terms to change some of that conversation, I think has been good. There's some amazing people I would like to debate. Someone like Tessa Khan at Uplift. I think she's incredible. I don't agree with things that she's saying, but I would love to understand it, not just in sound bites, right? Because
like the full fleshed out
That's
essay
it.
version, right?
Because when you listen, you listen to her on a podcast or on a TV show, she's got 2 minutes. And so, of course, in 2-3 minutes, you've got to put, all of your thoughts in a really kind of succinct way, and you might lose some of the context. I'd love to, and it's on my list for the new year, I just want to have a conversation, because I think the best thing we can do and the best thing industry can do as well in that conversation is learn. Mm-hmm. What is it that people are so anxious about, and what is it that is the issue, so that then they actually can have a two-way conversation, not just a defensive, oh god, there's something else coming our way, let's defend it.
Yeah, the key is the dialogue, right? I think it's what
100%.
I think it's what I keep one of the things that keeps coming up is the idea that we've in the world we can't have dialogue over anything. If it's any social issues, political issues, there's no ability to have dialogue. And I was in Ghana, and I said to the guy that we need to be able to bring even the people we disagree with to the table. Yeah. But there's a real problem with actually bringing people to the table. It doesn't seem people want to come to the table from both sides. Well, so how
and what's so interesting is that if you get a table and you put oil and gas and renewable people around that table, everyone agrees.
I know.
Everyone's on the same page. Everyone thinks the same things. It's when you mix the politicians in that that's when it becomes an issue. And the big issue I think we have globally, and let's just talk about the UK because I'm more familiar with it, but UK government are making decisions based on a 5-year time frame because that's the time that they're in power. Now, yes, of course, maybe they want to extend that. Of course they do. But it's a short-term view on numbers, on the economy, on whatever it might be. It's not a long-term view. And that just doesn't match.
In an industry which you explore today and you get output 10 years down the line.
10 years later, it doesn't make sense. It can't. And so, to me, what government is meant to be is it's meant to represent, and granted, many of us haven't voted necessarily for whoever's in government, but they are meant to represent the views of their electorate in a respectful, legitimate way that kind of looks at every option. And I don't think that they're doing that. Their ideology is so
front and center
and so severe. And yet it doesn't seem like there's any benefits to anyone in the long term. But in the short term, it looks like, oh, they've managed to do this. They've stopped oil and gas licensing in the North Sea, short term. In the long term, that's a huge impact on money for us. There's a potential, if we were to carry on, to make 165 billion worth in taxes off the North Sea alone in the next 10 years. Why, when you've got a massive black hole, would you not want to do that? But they're not thinking about 10 years. Yeah. They're thinking, what does it look like in the next 12 months? So that's kind of the juxtaposition, I think.
Yeah, no, there's a huge gap. I think I was going to say something. That's it. What do you think about because they're thinking short term, but then on a more global scale, we've got like the 2040 and 2050 targets, right? That's another thing that as I keep having more conversations, I'm looking at those being like, well, I don't know what they even mean,
They don't mean anything.
Yeah, and
is my feeling.
Yeah, how can we get to a point? What's the strategy because the climate change and all these issues, they're global, right? So we can't fix it here and then be done with it, right?
Yeah.
We can't just transfer our emissions somewhere else.
Which is what we're currently
exactly,
doing.
And then great, we're great, right?
Yeah.
So how, and also these net zero targets were supposed to be that long-term kind of guide, I guess, but they're completely unrealistic and not going to happen anyway. We can all see that. How can we all align?
If I knew the answer to that question, I think I'd be incredibly rich and just lying on a beach somewhere in Barbados. We've talked about it already, but net zero to me is like it's a privileged concept, really. I don't think it's possible to all align. You know, when you look at COP, I think there's some real question marks as to whether like COP has a role moving forwards, because you're trying to get such differing countries with differing energy resources and sources and climate impact to agree to one thing. I don't think it's possible. Secondly, to this point of the short-termism, it's so easy for these politicians to go into these conversations and say, by 2050, why do they all end in zero? Why have you chosen that year? You've not chosen it for any reason, otherwise it's a good soundbite. Why isn't it 2043? Because you've actually done the numbers and you've said, we think that if we do this per year, and these are our tactics, by 2043, we'll achieve that. So,
arbitrary.
It's
completely
arbitrary.
Just like picked it out of the sky.
And it's also outside of their remit. So in 2050, bearing in mind the UK,
we hope they're not going to be there anymore,
right? But bearing in mind, I think we had 9 prime ministers in 5 years or something. By 2050, according to that rule, we'd have had dozens. So that is, you're hoping then that every single prime minister or every single president comes in and has the same thoughts and processes. It doesn't make any sense. I think it needs to be regionalized to a point. And it's way more complicated than that, so I appreciate I'm like really simplifying it. But back to my point about, let's think about Europe. I think often we talk about Europe as like but it's not a block. It's like it's many different countries and cultures and different energy sources, etc. If you're the UK, you should be thinking, we've got gas, we've got wind, let's go hell for leather on those things, because that makes sense. If you're Norway, you've got hydro and you've got oil and gas. If you're the Netherlands, they're doing so much cool stuff in geothermal.
Oh, really?
Really cool. So I think we need to be thinking a little bit more kind of what can each country contribute, rather than all trying to reach these insane goals. Like I was talking about this in the office before I got here. We were talking about the plan in the UK for electric vehicles. No more petrol car sales from 2030 onwards.
Is that a thing?
That's a thing. That's a policy right now. That's 4 years away. That is unrealistic for the regular person on the street. And I was speaking to someone the other day, and they were saying the cheapest car that you can have is the one that's already sitting on your driveway, because it's depreciating every day, right? But you're asking people to go out and for their next car spend more than they can. And also at this point, if everyone had an electric car and all plugged into the grid, we'd probably get our wish for blackouts, right? So
one might, I guess, say exactly the same thing.
There's so much infrastructure, there's so much needs to be put in place. But 2030 is the next election. So it doesn't really matter, does it? It's just a number. But meanwhile, no, it's not, because then car manufacturers are having to make decisions today about what they do. Investors are having to make decisions today about what they do. So by 2030, even though that is, in my opinion, unachievable, maybe it's that all of our car manufacturers in the UK have closed down.
Yeah, the effects downstream are severe, right? And it touches literally, you said how, we all know that this is made of hydrocarbons and everything, right? But I think people are unaware of how far-reaching it is. And also, when I have this conversation, and like I come across, sometimes I get a little bit irate when I'm having this conversation with people,
same.
right? And I end the conversation, I'm like, actually, I'm not angry at you for not understanding. No. My anger is actually at the industry for not doing better, as we said. Because I always use the example, we all have teeth, but we're not all dentists. We go to the dentist, so they tell us like, okay, you need to do this to keep your teeth in order, right? So just because we all use energy doesn't mean we all understand.
Energy experts.
So I think, it all comes back. It's on the industry to do to do a better job and to put its trousers up.
And things come round, right? Like, obviously, because we're both so young, we weren't alive in the 60s during the kind of nuclear, conversations and activism, etc.
Against
nuclear.
Was that? Would you say that's kind of a similar? You can compare them.
I think you can compare it. So, kind of 60s, 70s, like massive anti-nuclear, sentiment. Okay. Lots of activism, understandably, to a point where there had been some big, natural disasters or big disasters. Now the conversation's coming back to, nuclear, interesting. It's the most renewable source that you can have. It's going to take a while to get back to it. But is that what's going to happen 20 years from now, where we're having these conversations?
Go back to oil and gas.
Right. Look at New Zealand.
Yeah.
5 years ago, they made that decision. No new licenses, no new oil and gas. 5 years later, in the same way that we are an island, they are an island, you're responsible a lot of the time for kind of your own domestic, produce. And they don't have enough. So they're having to start again. But the issue comes, the talent's gone by then, because we were speaking to someone recently who is Brazilian by background, worked at Petrobras in Brazil, then came to London, because who doesn't want to come to London for work, right? And what an amazing opportunity. Got here and realised that whereas he was doing a job in Brazil that his family were incredibly proud of, his friends were like, wow, you're working for Petrobras, like nailed it.
Can I have a job, please?
He's come here and he can't tell his friends what he does, because people are like really judgmental about it.
How old is he?
He's mid-30s.
Okay.
So he's left. He was here for 4 years. He worked here. He's now gone to Colombia. So that talent pool is going. And so, and it's much, much quicker to lose it than to get it back. And that's what concerns me, is you can make all these decisions. I have no doubt that these decisions will change in the next 5 years. Like, I'm absolutely convinced of it. It's just how bad does it get that no new licenses in the North Sea. Yeah. But how long does it take to claw it back? That's the worry.
Yeah. No, something you touched on it there, that I think something that's quite close to my heart, being, young in the industry, is talent, right? But I think this conversation on talent is super difficult when you've got these unrealistic policies, right? How can we have a conversation about keeping people in when why would they come anyway, or why would they want to join the industry anyway?
If they're worried about losing their job, yeah.
Exactly. So how do you look at this conversation? Because one of your committees is the talent committee. Yeah. And I guess your talent and advocacy committee kind of linked in terms of changing the narrative with young people using TikTok, as you mentioned. How are you navigating that? What are the biggest challenges you're facing in terms of attracting young people, or even communicating with young people around what the energy industry really means and how we can get them to come back? I guess.
I think the communicating piece is hard, because I think you need to be going into universities, you need to be going into schools. We've had a lot of stories from people that we speak to about courses being removed at universities around kind of geology and others, petroleum engineering. At school, they're taught a curriculum that perhaps doesn't engage with hydrocarbons in the way that it could. So
does the current curriculum deal with renewables and stuff?
It does, yeah.
What does it teach?
I'm not a teacher, so don't hold me to this, but the focus, from what we understand, is very renewable focused. So this is how renewables are made. This is where this is how they work. This is how they power your homes. This is why we should have more of them. Right. It's quite one-sided. I'm sure that's not everywhere, but that's kind of what we've heard. I also think probably what happens in London versus what happens in the rest of the country is different. And I think we do have to think about that. When we've been speaking to people, so the talent committee is made up of people who are senior execs who've been in the industry a long time, and then also people that are just coming in, and globally. So the conversation in the Middle East, in Latin America, so different to the conversation that we're having here. They're we're inundated with people. Yeah. We're creating more courses in Saudi or Kuwait or wherever, because we don't have enough space. Brilliant. It's a mixed bag here. So some companies that we speak to actually don't have any issues recruiting young people. But my caveat to that is I think there's less and less graduate schemes available, or less and less roles available, and so more people are applying for the same thing as opposed to it being kind of more spread out. So I think that maybe creates like it looks good, but actually it's not necessarily as clear cut as that. The biggest thing when we speak to young people that they want to see from a role is what purpose they play and what purpose the role or the career or the job has in the world. So to me,
it's obvious.
It's
right?
obvious. It's like the easiest.
Yeah.
But we're talking about Microsoft or Google or kind of the sexy places to work. Maybe they're not even sexy anymore. I'm too old. But like, there's some cool tech companies or whatever.
Cool.
But how are they powered? How does ChatGPT exist? It's through energy. So I think again, I don't have like an answer, because if I did, it'd be brilliant. But there needs to be a concerted effort at that stage of conversation, especially around people maybe doing STEM subjects, around actually, would you not want to be working for a company that is at the forefront of technology and that legitimately changes people's lives? If you framed it like that, who wouldn't want to do that?
This is the innovation centres that you've got in, like, I've just come from Kuwait, right? They've got the Ahmadi Innovation Valley, so that's going to localise all that technology specifically for Kuwait. They're going into offshore now, so which they've never done before. Well, they've kind of done it, but not really.
And we'll lose that ability in the UK because we won't be first and foremost on
developing
anything.
New technologies, developing new talent specifically for those.
We won't be able to compete, around AI, around around new technologies. We won't be able to compete. The US has got an unlimited access to natural gas. Yes, they've got some issues with their grid and with their infrastructure, etc. But in terms of the power that they will have access to power AI, no pun intended, we can't compete with that.
Is this issue, so this issue around talent, is it also you're seeing that in the US as well?
We do see it in the US. It's not as stark, I would say, and it also is very state dependent. So if you live in the southern states, if you're in Texas or Oklahoma or Louisiana, your mindset is quite different to living in New York or Boston, etc. That being said, one of the ladies or girls on our committee is a student currently.
Colorado School of Mines?
Yeah, Colorado School of Mines. And she comes from an oil and gas family, so she's very, aware of kind of the industry, etc. But she says there are definitely people in her class. She's now doing kind of more like economics and social policy in this, stint of her education, who are, even though they live in a state like Texas, are incredibly unaware still and uneducated around it. So I still think there's work to do, but I don't think it's as stark as it is in some places.
Okay. And you also mentioned before that Pragma is looking at going beyond the UK and Europe and the US, and you're looking at different areas of the world. And so what you said, obviously you know more about the UK as that's where you're from, but what's kind of the plan in terms of going global? What's the mission there?
Pragma goes global. So I think we, in an ideal world, right from day one, we would have been everywhere.
Of course.
But there's only 4 of us, so we have to.
It's only 4 of you?
Only 4 of us, yeah.
So it's you, Jack, Ben, and.
And then we have one girl who's based in South Africa, who is like a researcher and all-round fantastic person.
Okay.
I think that the biggest opportunity for us next year regionally, aside from kind of where we're working already, is the Middle East. There's a few reasons for that. I think, firstly, the relationship between the Middle East and the US, and kind of what Middle East can learn from the US in terms of more the kind of operational, like day-to-day, oil and gas, etc., and vice versa. There is a lot of money in the Middle East.
So bringing investment from there.
So bringing investment there into other jurisdictions, I think, is a bridge that we can play. Or we can operate in. I think one of the biggest opportunities we have in the longer term is to start looking at more developing economies. So working in LATAM, working in Africa in particular. Jack and I have a real soft spot for the African continent.
I do now as well.
We've spent a lot of time there. We've loved working with Indigenous companies in Africa. And I think it plays more into my person and my purpose, which is access to energy for everyone. And if we can then bring some of that into what we do as well, that I think that would be really motivating.
The idea is to help bring investment from
Correct.
elsewhere to
Africa. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And look, there are some people that do a great job of that already. So I think whatever we do, we'd want it to be additive. But there are projects now if you're a US investor, you don't know what projects are available to you, in sub-Saharan Africa. And you might also have a mindset that it's not your risk profile or whatever. And actually, I think we need to transform some of that. There are many projects in Africa across the continent that are perhaps at this point less, risky than here.
Yeah, 100%.
So I think and we've started to do a few. We're working with a company at the moment who are looking to develop some frontier assets in Papua New Guinea, for example. Okay. So we're starting to look at some of those other opportunities, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, no, I've this year from doing this, I've got into Africa, and it's super interesting. I think the effect, if you like you said, if you're really going to have an effect on access to energy, Africa's the place. I think Africa's 600 million people that access to electricity, right? So that's super interesting. Because my interest in energy came from Latin America, and then it went global, and that's kind of localizing a little bit. But just to finish off, I want to go back a bit to the mindset thing, just for one more question. And because I listened to again one of your other episodes that you did for another podcast. You said you kind of love the chaos.
Yeah.
You love a crisis, because you said that when you worked at the Energy Council, you liked events because anything could go wrong at any time. So how can someone learn to deal with crisis, live in the chaos, and kind of something Matthew McConaughey said that I love the way he speaks. He said, I'm gonna bottle it now. He said, don't try and control up, but find the rhyme in the chaos of life, something like that, which I thought was super cool. Yeah. How can someone do? How do you do that?
Matthew McConaughey is definitely cooler than me, but I do. I love the chaos. I thought for a while I might work in crisis PR. So when a brand, the shizzle really hits the fan, and you're like, oh God, what do we do? I quite like the idea of that, especially because then it's not it's not my challenge, it's someone else's.
That comes into being an entrepreneur now, doesn't it?
It does. But years ago, I had a young grad that worked for me as a conference producer, and we were about to go and run an event in Nigeria, and it was her first event. That's terrifying, actually. Really, you're 21, she'd only ever been to Spain. That was the only place she'd ever been, and then suddenly the next trip you're doing is to Nigeria to run an event for 300 people. It's scary. She was really nervous, and I said, right, well, make a list of all the things that could go wrong. And I thought she'd maybe come with 7 or 8. She had 27 things that could go wrong, which included volcanic eruptions, which I don't believe there are any volcanoes in Nigeria, but correct me if I'm wrong. But we went through every single one. So if this happened, what would you do? Well, there's a solution to it. Okay. So actually, for every single thing that could happen, there is probably a solution to it. And in particular, in a business context where, potentially you're able to use money to sort it out as well, that helps. But I just think, what's the worst thing that could happen? Yes, something's gone horribly wrong. Now what? I've had all of my equipment stolen the night before a conference when everyone was showing up at 7 a.m. the next day. And we turned it into a round table, and it was one of the best events we've ever done. We had no IT, nothing, no AV. I've had a hurricane take the roof off a conference hotel halfway through the morning of day one. Luckily, no one was injured, but it could have been a lot worse. And everyone just rallied round. And I think that's what you constantly see in crisis or chaos, is people stepping up and actually having to deal with it. And so now I feel quite relaxed into it. It's like, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? Well, let's put a plan together for the thing that we're most worried about. My friend said to me this morning, I'm late to everything constantly, and I kind of live. I am, okay. And I live in this constant kind of like chaos myself. Really,
you're on time today.
I was, thank you. And she's like, but it all just seems to work out. And I was like, yeah, but because it doesn't matter. You know, obviously not being rude or unprofessional by being late to anything, but you just kind of roll with the punches. I don't know if that's advice, but I think the advice piece would be just nothing really that happens is no one's going to die, actually, really. And if they are, and if you're in an industry where they are, then I think probably chaos feels far more terrifying.
Yeah.
But for most people in a professional setting where they're not a surgeon or a doctor or something, or working offshore in a health and safety role, you know, it just let it roll off you, and it will be fine.
Yeah. And as my last question, I told you before, I forgot my book.
Oh yeah,
I'm so upset.
No quotes for me.
No quotes for you. We'll have to do it again. And, do it. But what would be your takeaway or a question for the audience that you think they should go in and think about? I ask everyone that.
Yeah, I would really love for anyone listening to this to just look up, go on ChatGPT and say, can you give me 3 household products that don't contain or are not made from hydrocarbons?
Have you done that?
No. I don't think there's an answer.
Yeah, but that's why.
Which is the point, right? But I would love comment on it, right? Like what are the things that you live with, that you can't live without every day, that don't have hydrocarbons involved in some respect? And ask, you know, I know everyone's using ChatGPT, but look, just use it and ask these questions to say, you know, why is it so important? How does it impact us every day? There are certain things that there is currently not a replacement for. And there's plenty of people working on that. And in the future, maybe there will be, but right now there's not. So just look around your house and ask ChatGPT, is there anything in here that doesn't have hydrocarbons involved in it in some way?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for staying with me today. I remember when I was doing my research for Lewis, and I came across, you know, he's a bit of a LinkedIn guy like I am.
Yeah.
So I was going through and I saw, what's this PRAGMA thing? And I was like, oh, they've stolen my idea. Then I realized I was stealing your idea, and I thought I made sure to ask him a question. So one day we would do this. So thank you, and we'll do it again soon, I hope.
Yeah, thank you, and shout out to Lewis.
Absolutely, the connector.
The connector.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.